Kiddushin Daf Yomi Kiddushin, understanding the wealth divide. בשתי shmitot הכתוב מדבר. The pasuk says in the Torah, telling us about the law of shmitta, particularly shmitat ksafim, the law of forgoing loans at the end of the seventh year. וזה דבר השמיטה שמות, כל בעל משה ידו אשר ישב ברעהו לא יגרוס את רעהו ואת אחיו, כי קרא shmitta להשם. The term shmitta is used both for forgoing a loan at the end of the seventh year, and also for the land lying fallow during the seventh year. The connection between these two halachot, in what way are they connected? Why are they both called shmitta? Just because it's the seventh year, then call it shvius. Why do we call them shmitta specifically? What is the relationship between the shmitat ksafim and shmitat karka? But in understanding the connection, we understand Hashem's will, we understand the divine intent, and we get a whole new perspective on poverty and class difference, and the understanding of the socioeconomic structure that the Torah wants the world to have. And it links to the Gemara that we did and the Matmonim that we had in Masechta Gittin, Daf Lamed Vov and Daf Lamed Zayin. So if you want to go into this piece, you should look at it in conjunction with that Gemara and with the Matmonim that we did in Daf Lamed Vav and Lamed Zayin, where we spoke about Shmitat Ksafim, but we didn't speak about the connection between Shmitat Ksafim and Shmitat Karka. What is the connection? So the Gemara starts, our Gemara is a Rabbi Rabbi Shimon, who says that any mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people in the Midbar applies whether you're in Israel or not. The mitzvot that were given to Bnei Yisrael when they got to Eretz Yisrael, or just before they came into Eretz Yisrael, that was specific for Eretz Yisrael. Two exceptions, one of them being hashmatat ksafim. שאף על פי שנצטוו עליהם לאחר כניסתם לארץ נוהגת בין בארץ בין בחוץ לארץ. Even though shmitat ksafim was given to them in Israel, it applies universally. Ask the Gemara, shmatat ksafim chovat hagufi. Shmatat ksafim has nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael. It's a commercial law. It's a law of business. It's a chovat haguf. And the Gemara has already established that a chovat haguf, that means it's not dependent on the land. It's not a law that applies to the land. It's a law that applies to the individual, to the person. And as such, it applies wherever you're living. It doesn't make any difference that the commercial laws are the same whether you're in New York or you're in Yerushalayim. Why even referencing it here? No, says the Gemara, not so simple, because Rebbe says in a Breita, based on this posuk that we have in Parshas Re'eh. V'zeh dvar hashmita shemot b'shnei shmitot hakatuv medaber. The Torah uses the word shmita twice alongside one another. V'zeh dvar hashmita shemot. So we see we're talking about two shmitot in one sentence. So they are connected. Achat shmitat karka v'achat shmitat ksafim. To teach you that bizman she'ata meshamet karka, ata meshamet ksafim. Bizman she'ata meshamet karka, ata meshamet ksafim. To teach us, you might think this is a business law that applies universally, and that's what our logic would tell us. But no, even the law of shmitat ksafim, the law of forgoing loans, this financial law is linked to Eretz Yisrael and applies only when you're living in Eretz Yisrael, says Rebbe, and the Gemara brings that in order to explain the din of Rabbi Rabbi Shimon. And the Rambam brings that lahalacha. En shmitat ksafim noheget min haTorah ela bizman she'yovel noheg. The law of shmitat ksafim, forgoing loans, only applies when the yovel applies. That means when more than half of the Jewish people are living on the land in Eretz Yisrael, then shmitta applies midoraisa, and then shmitat ksafim applies midoraisa. Midivrei sofrin shetei shmitat ksafim noheget bizman hazeh b'chol makom. But the Rabbanan said that we've got to treat shmitat ksafim as global in our present time. So although shmitat hakarka is not midoraisa, and therefore we would have thought that there's no shmitat ksafim, no, there's shmitat ksafim as well. Says the Rambam, so that we don't forget this. It's a kind of a law you can get into bad habits quite easily. To train yourself as a society to the idea of forgoing alone in the shmitta, you don't want to give up that training, that development, that social development. So we keep that going, even though, strictly speaking, midoraisa, the law of shmitat ksafim, does not apply today. What's the whole principle behind Shmitat Ksafim? So we talked about it in Gittin Daf Lamed Zayin, and Rabbeinu Bechaya references the Mishnah in Shvius, which is the basis of our Matmonim on Daf Lamed Zayin, and that is that the way it works, if you remember, the Balabos has to say, the lender has to say to the borrower at the end of the time, your debt is forgone. I forgive your debt because it's a shmitta, there's nothing I can do. But that's not the end of the conversation, said the Mishnah and Shvius. The borrower should then say, I insist. I would be incredibly embarrassed not to repay you. The lender then says, but what can I do? The Torah says I can't claim it back. So he says, then I'll give it to you as a gift. That's what he's going to do. He's going to give it as a gift. And the lender is permitted to accept it. Not only is it permitted to accept it, but the Torah approves of that. The Torah wants that to take place. So it's clearly not about the finance. It's about the attitude. Says Rabbeinu Yonah that lo yinhag adnut ba'atzmo lahachricho al pirono. It's about not oppressing, not demanding payment. It's creating a reciprocal relationship between lender and borrower, not a one-sided power battle where the creditor is the source of power. At the end of Shmitta, there's no source of power. He says, what can I do? I've lost it. You don't owe me anything. And he says, but I want to give you something. I want to give it back to you as a gift, so that they're able to reestablish a balanced relationship. And that's the kind of economy and that's the kind of society that Hashem wants. He wants them to be creditors, and he wants there to be borrowers. He wants there to be rich, and he wants there to be poor. But he wants the relationship between the two of them to be one of empathy and kindness and understanding and mutual support. That's the society Hashem wants. He doesn't want everybody to rich so that nobody has to be rich, so that nobody has to help anybody. He wants everybody to help everybody. We have to trade, we have to borrow, we have to lend. He wants the economy to flow, because that's how people engage, that's how people interact, that's how people grow, through the business they do with one another, the kindness they do to one another. You've got to be good to people, otherwise they despise you. If they despise you, that's bad for business. So you've got to be a mensch. Business requires that you've got to be a mensch, otherwise your business suffers, and you get the message very quickly that you're not a mensch. Hashem wants it to be that way, but he wants there to be empathy and kindness and sympathy between people. The Bein Bechaya says very clearly that the din of Shmitas Ksofim is a din of attitude. What the Rebbeinu Shalom is interested in is the attitude. In Mishnah Shvi says, and that's why Zeh Devar HaShmita. This is the conversation of Shmitta. And the Baal HaTurim references that Mishnah in order to explain the word Devar HaShmita at the very beginning of our posuk. Devar is words. These are the words of the Shmitta. What I want, says Hashem, is a conversation between creditor and borrower. It's not about whether you get the money back or you don't. There are mechanisms for that. We've got Prusbul, we've got all sorts of ways to get around that. That's not the main thing. The main thing is, what's the conversation? This is the conversation I want there to be, says the Mishnah in Shvius. So the question then is, so what's that got to do with karka? Okay, so we understand Shmitas Ksofim. The financial Shmitta, we understand it's a matter of attitude and relationship and socio-economic environment and ecosystems, understand that. But what's that got to do with karka? It's based on a Bechor Shor on the Parsha. That is, that a Jew uses borrowed money to plant his field. He takes the money he borrows, he invests it in seeds, and he needs to be financed while the crop is growing. Comes the Shmitta year. If he hasn't got a good year the year before, and now it's Shmitta, now he's got a problem, he's got to repay debts. And he's not planting anything, he's got no crop. That's why, says the HaMekdover, you've got to forgo the debt. Because that just can't work. The farmer just can't operate if you're going to call your loan at Shmitta time. Here's Kara Shmitta la Hashem. He calls a Shmitta for Hashem's name. He's doing it l'Shem Shamayim. And now you're going to come and exploit his weakness? That's not okay. You've got to let it go. And that's why for a goy, says the Bechor Shor, with a goy you can charge interest, because he's in business, he's not in agriculture. So he's constantly going. If he borrows, he lends. The economy is moving. It's not seasonal, and he doesn't have a shmita. He doesn't have a year where you can't do business. So for a guy, it's okay to have normal commercial relationships. I lend you money, you repay the money. But in the case of a Jew, where the farmer takes the money to invest in Eretz Yisrael and to build, and there's a year where he can't do that, you can't exploit that, you've got to hold off and participate in his shmita. The way the banker participates in the agriculturist shmita, the agriculturist has to take a year off and he can't work. What does the banker do? He forgoes his loans. Everybody invests in this idea of shmita. That's how the HaMekdover explains the connection between Shmitat Ksafim and Shmitat Karka, which we see in our Sugi and we see in the Posuk. But there's another aspect to it as well that I want to touch on, and that's an understanding what land is and what poor people are. If you think of land, it's afar, it's dust, it's sand. And we use afar to talk about poverty and simpleness and humility, where Avram says, V'anochi afar ve'efer, I'm dust and ashes. And David HaMelech says, this is for Slichas time, Ki hu yada yitzreinu zechor ki afar anachnu. How many times do we say it in these days? Remember, we are afar. Says the Netziv in the HaMekdover, what's the difference between afar and efer? Afar comes from nothing, but it grows everything. Sand comes from stones, from rocks, from geological evolution of however many years that happens to take. And that's it, but it grows. Out of this nothingness comes everything we eat. Afer comes from human activity. You make ash from industry. Industry produces ash. But what does ash produce? Nothing. And Avrom says, I'm off over Afer. I don't come from anything. I'm not Afer, that I come as a byproduct of great industry from Zechut Avot. And I'm not Afar, that I'm going to produce great things. And I'm Afar. I'm Afar ve'Afer. I have the weakness of both. But what's important in the Hamikdavar is to understand what Afar is. Afar is something, yesh lo ma'alat toldot ki hakol hu min ha'afar. The idea of Afar is it creates toldot, it generates wealth. Even though it's nothing, it comes from nothing, it's inert. But it generates wealth. We've got to understand this gives us a whole new approach to poor people. Poverty, poor people, they're like Afar. They're simple. Everybody trods on them, everybody walks over them. They don't come from anything. They don't have rich parents. They don't have rich grandparents. But everything's going to come from them. It's from their simplicity. It's from their humility. And even the economy. They enable the economy. You need poor people. Who'll do the labor? That's why they have to import immigrants. Eretz Yisrael is full of Filipinos. Why? Somebody has to do the labor and everybody's too rich to do it. The Israelis are too rich to do it. So you've got to import aniyim. You've got to import poor people. That's how much you need poor people. America needs to import Mexicans. You need poor people. You need poor people for an economy. You need poor people for tzedakah. You need poor people for shmitta. Don't look at the poor people like Afar. Yes, they come from nothing and you trod over them. But everything you need, eat, your entire economy rests on the back of the poor people. And communism and socialism understood that idea and marketed it to bits and used it to manipulate the world for a period of time because they saw that truth. And that's why Jews were attracted to it, because they realized there's truth in it. What they did was they distorted it and destroyed every value there might have been. But Jewish people understood there's a Torah truth in this, that everything is on the back of the poor people, and treat them like Afar. Anochi Afar ve'Efer. Yes, I'm just dust. And as the Netziv says, I come from nothing, but I'm not going to nothing. You can't build an economy without me, and you need to invest in me. And therefore the shmitat ksafim and the shmitat karka is the same idea. Shmitta, we said in an earlier Matmonim, shmitta comes from the word lishmot. Let it slip away. Just don't hold on so tightly to your assets. Don't hold on so tightly to your cash. Shemot, let it slide away. It's okay. There's more where that comes from. This is about productivity. The poor people are productive and land is productive. It doesn't produce this year, it will produce next year. You'll be okay. Invest in it. Don't hold on to it. Invest in it, work in it, use it. That's what Afar is. Invest in your poor people, educate them, develop them, grow them, because that's where your future is. And therefore you've got to invest in your poor people with shmitat ksafim, and in your Afar and in your land with shmitat karka, because both teach you not to exploit the downtrodden, not to exploit the dust of the earth, and not to exploit the poor people. There was a very important movie that was made in 2019 by a Korean director called Parasite, where it explores so powerfully the danger of this widening wealth gap between the rich and the poor, when the rich don't understand that their whole world rests on the back of the poor. And you have to keep the poor going, you have to take care of them, you have to nourish them, because without them, everything collapses. And that's something that we don't realize. And today we're living in a time of a widening wealth gap that is causing people a lot of concern, not only for the economy, but for society as a whole. And here we see the Torah's outlook, how the Torah looks at wealth gap. The Torah understands the importance of preserving that wealth gap, but investing in the poor people the same as we invest in the land from which we eat.